5 minutes ago, the ground shifted under Donald Trump's feet. Not with a raid, not with an indictment, not with a headline that spins for a day and dies. This was something colder, heavier, and far more lethal to a business empire. A federal judge appointed a court receiver to take operational control of Mar-a-Lago. That means Trump didn't just lose a case. He lost command of the one property that has always functioned like the beating heart of his public identity, his residence, his private club, his symbol of power, the stage where he hosts donors, allies, cameras, and the myth of total control. And now, by court order, that stage is being run by someone else. A receiver isn't a consultant. A receiver isn't a monitor. A receiver is the person who steps into the owner's role with real authority because the court has decided the owner cannot be trusted to do the job. The deed may still carry Trump's name, but the operations, the money, the staff, the rules, the access, those move under the receiver's hand. Think of it like this. Ownership becomes a photograph in a frame. Control becomes the living reality. And the court just handed the living reality to a stranger who answers to the judge. What makes this uniquely brutal is the target. Mar-a-Lago isn't just another building on a spreadsheet. For Trump, it's a fortress, a brand museum, a political nerve center. It's where the image of Trump, the billionaire, the kingmaker, the boss, gets performed daily. Strip that control away, and you aren't just changing management. You're dismantling the myth. The order, thick, detailed, and merciless, lays out a pattern that the judge says left the court no alternative. Fraud, safety violations, defiance of previous court directives, not one mistake, not one misunderstanding. A repeated "we'll fix it" paired with a repeated "we didn't." According to the court's findings, the club's membership pitch was allegedly built on exaggerations and misrepresentations. Financial strength presented as stable while money allegedly moved elsewhere, improvements promised while repairs lagged, exclusivity marketed while internal operations didn't match the glossy story. And the club's physical issues weren't cosmetic. The judge cites expert assessments that describe dangerous deficiencies, fire safety concerns, structural trouble in specific areas, electrical systems flagged as non-compliant. But the part that pushes judges toward a receiver, almost every time, isn't just the problem, it's the refusal to correct it after the court has ordered correction. Because courts start with lighter tools, deadlines, disclosures, sanctions, inspections, compliance plans. Receivership is the tool judges reach for when the lighter tools don't work. It's the legal equivalent of saying, "You've proven that you will not do what you promised, so we are doing it without you." And then came the name. The judge appointed Sarah Mitchell, a veteran operator known for taking over distressed luxury properties and private clubs, not a politician, not a celebrity, a professional manager with a track record and a mandate. Her instructions are blunt. Take control, stabilize the property, enforce compliance, and report to the court. Under this structure, the receiver controls the levers that actually matter. Staff oversight, including hiring and firing, vendor contracts, operational policies, financial accounts and cash flow, maintenance and repairs, member rules and enforcement, and, most explosively, access to the property. That last piece is where the humiliation becomes physical, because under the receiver's authority, Trump's ability to enter Mar-a-Lago isn't a guarantee. It becomes a request, a permission slip, a negotiation. If he wants to come in, he asks. If he wants to host something, he asks. If he wants to use the property the way he always has, politically, socially, symbolically, he asks. And if the receiver believes his presence interferes with management, compliance, or safety remediation, the receiver can impose conditions, limit access, or return to the court for stricter restrictions. That's the moment the story stops being legal drama and becomes something else: operational exile. Then, as the news detonated, Warren Buffett's name entered the conversation, not as a partisan voice, but as a business voice. A man who understands what it means to lose control of a signature asset. His point was simple and savage. In business, there are assets you can lose and survive. And then there are the crown jewels, the flagship symbols that tell the world who you are. If a court takes your flagship and installs a manager above you, it signals something worse than financial distress. It signals that the world, employees, partners, members, lenders, can no longer rely on your leadership. Not you made a mistake, not you had a bad quarter, but you are not credible. And credibility, once punctured at the center, doesn't heal like a bruise. It spreads like a crack. Right now, Trump's first instinct is predictable. Attack the judge, rage at the process, promise an appeal, insist nothing is wrong, declare persecution. But the receiver exists precisely because the court believes those reflexes are the problem, because defiance, not compliance, is what got the property here. And here's where the next chapter becomes unavoidable. If Trump tries to keep controlling the club from the shadows, through staff, through members, through public pressure, he doesn't just create drama, he risks giving the judge the one thing that makes a receiver even stronger: proof of interference. Because in receivership, the court's patience is not infinite, it's measured, documented, and enforced. Here's the part most people don't understand about receivership. It's not supervision, it's not oversight, it's not someone watching you run your business. It's replacement. A receiver doesn't sit in the corner with a clipboard. A receiver sits in the chair. And the first 30 days are where the reality becomes brutal, fast, because that's when control stops being theoretical and starts showing up in everyday life. The receiver's first move is always the same: establish an independent command structure. That means new reporting lines, new financial controls, new decision-making authority. The club staff, who used to treat Trump's word as final, now take instruction from someone who can fire them, replace vendors, rewrite procedures, and bring everything back to the court in writing. In other words, the receiver becomes the only boss that matters. And that's why this hits harder than a fine or a settlement. A fine hurts your money. A receivership humiliates your power, because the order doesn't just say, fix the problems. It says, Trump cannot be trusted to fix the problems. That difference changes everything. Under the terms described in the story, the receiver gains full operational authority, which, translated into real life, looks like this. All revenue flows into accounts controlled by the receiver: membership fees, events, catering, merchandise, anything. That cash doesn't route through Trump's management team anymore. It's collected, managed, and distributed under court supervision. All expenses get approved by the receiver: repairs, payroll, vendor invoices, insurance premiums. If the receiver doesn't sign off, it doesn't happen. Contracts can be reviewed, renegotiated, or terminated. Landscaping, security, maintenance, food service, entertainment, luxury vendors, anything that was Trump's people can be replaced. Operations can be rewritten: safety procedures, staff training, maintenance schedules, inspection access, reporting rules, compliance tracking. The receiver can force a modern, court-friendly system into a club that was built on informal loyalty and image. And then there's the nuclear detail: access control. In receiverships, access is power. It's the simplest tool, and it's the most psychologically crushing. If the receiver controls who can enter, when, and why, then Trump's relationship with Mar-a-Lago flips upside down overnight. He goes from owner who holds court to person who must request entry. Even if the receiver allows him to stay there as a residence, it's no longer a private kingdom. It becomes something closer to conditional occupancy, where boundaries, schedules, guests, and usage can all be restricted if the receiver believes it's necessary for compliance, safety, or operational stability. Imagine the daily mechanics. Trump wants to host a fundraiser, he needs approval. Trump wants to hold a political meeting, he needs approval. Trump wants to make a grand entrance for cameras, he needs approval. Trump wants to bring a guest into certain areas, he needs approval. And here's what makes it even sharper. The receiver doesn't answer to Trump. The receiver answers to the judge. So if Trump tries to pressure the receiver the way he pressures employees, through intimidation, public attacks, private demands, the receiver's response is not "yes, sir." The receiver's response is noted, documented, filed. This is why receivership is considered one of the most extreme civil remedies. Courts do not do this casually. When it happens, it's because the judge believes a property is at risk, people are at risk, money is at risk, and the owner is either unwilling or incapable of correcting course. That's also why the appeal route is harder than people think. Owners love to scream property rights. Courts usually agree with them, up to a point, but appeals courts typically give trial judges wide discretion on remedies, especially when the order is built on detailed findings, patterns, timelines, missed deadlines, ignored directives, and ongoing hazards. If the judge wrote a thick record, the owner isn't just appealing a decision, he's trying to overturn a narrative of facts, and facts are sticky. Now zoom out and look at what this does to Trump's ecosystem. Mar-a-Lago isn't just a club, it's a brand engine. It's the place where membership fees buy the feeling of proximity, where donors pay to be seen, where photos signal access, where political influence becomes a luxury product. A receiver disrupts that entire machine. Members won't just ask, is the food good? They'll ask, is this stable? Vendors won't just ask, will we get paid? They'll ask, who's in charge? Donors won't just ask, can I host something? They'll ask, will this become evidence? And then the quiet terror begins for the people around him. If a court was willing to seize operational control of the flagship, what happens to everything else? Banks reassess risk, partners revisit contracts, licensing deals look at morality clauses. Everyone starts reading the fine print with new eyes. That's the hidden power of this move. It doesn't just constrain one building, it triggers a credibility audit across an entire network. This is where Warren Buffett's framework matters, because it explains why this kind of loss spreads far beyond a single property. Buffett has always argued that every real organization has one asset that matters more than all the others combined. Not the biggest on paper, not the most expensive, the one that anchors trust. He calls it the crown jewel. Lose secondary assets and you can recover. Lose divisions and you can restructure. Lose market share and you can fight back. But lose control of the crown jewel, and the system starts collapsing inward. Why? Because flagship assets do two things at once. 1, they generate disproportionate cash flow. 2, they signal competence to everyone watching. Mar-a-Lago is exactly that kind of asset. It isn't just real estate, it's Trump's headquarters, residence, political stage, donor magnet, branding symbol, and proof of success rolled into one physical location. It's where loyalty is monetized, where influence feels tangible, where power is staged. When a court says you can't run this anymore, the message isn't subtle. It tells employees that authority has shifted. It tells members that trust has broken. It tells banks that risk has changed. It tells partners that association now carries legal exposure. And crucially, it tells the market that the owner failed at managing the one thing he should have protected at all costs. Buffett's insight is brutal here. If you can't manage the asset that defines you, no one believes you can manage anything else. That belief shift is what turns receivership from a legal event into a systemic one, because once the flagship falls, every connected asset gets repriced. Not financially at first, but psychologically. Banks don't wait for defaults. They reassess assumptions. Credit committees quietly ask, if the flagship needed court intervention, what about the rest? If safety violations were ignored there, where else? If financial misrepresentation happened there, what else is opaque? That doesn't require new evidence. It only requires doubt, and doubt is lethal in finance. Loans that were once routine renewals become enhanced reviews. Covenants that were ignored get enforced. Waivers stop being automatic, extensions stop being friendly. Even if no bank calls a loan immediately, the environment changes, credit tightens, flexibility disappears. The margin for error goes to zero. Now layer in brand contagion. Trump-branded properties don't all belong to Trump. Many are licensing arrangements, partnerships where the brand itself is the product. Those agreements are built on one assumption, that the brand increases value. Receivership flips that equation, once the flagship property is publicly ruled mismanaged, to the point that a judge installs a third party, brand value turns into brand risk. Developers start asking, why keep the name if it attracts scrutiny? Why pay licensing fees if association hurts bookings? Why renew when exit clauses exist? Brand consultants call this the reverse halo effect. When the core symbol fails, everything downstream gets tainted by proximity. And here's the uncomfortable truth. This process doesn't need headlines to continue. Most of it happens quietly. Lawyers reviewing contracts, accountants reevaluating exposure, insurers adjusting terms, partners preparing exit strategies. By the time the public sees it, decisions are already locked in. That's why Buffett says recovery is almost impossible. Not because the owner can't fight, but because trust evaporates faster than it can be rebuilt. Trust takes years. Receivership destroys it in one order. Now consider the human side. Inside Trump's organization, people are watching the same signals. Senior staff see the writing. Mid-level managers worry about resumes. High performers, the ones with options, start looking elsewhere. Once talent begins to leak, operational quality drops, which reinforces the narrative that the organization is deteriorating. It becomes self-fulfilling. And the most dangerous part? None of this requires Trump to lose ownership. That's the paradox. He can still own Mar-a-Lago on paper, but ownership without control doesn't stop contagion. The market doesn't care about deeds. It cares about authority. Who decides? Who signs? Who controls cash? Who answers to the court? Those answers matter more than whose name is on the title. This is why Buffett's comparison hits so hard. For him, losing operational control of Berkshire's core would mean the company is already finished, even if the stock still trades, even if assets still exist. Because organizations don't collapse when assets disappear. They collapse when credibility does. This is where the story stops being abstract and starts becoming personal. Receivership doesn't just restructure spreadsheets, it rewires daily life. Every ordinary action now passes through someone else's authority. Under this kind of court order, Trump doesn't wake up and decide how his day unfolds at Mar-a-Lago. He requests it. Access is no longer assumed. Movement is no longer automatic. Presence is no longer power. If he wants to enter certain areas, host guests, hold meetings, stage events, or simply use the property the way he once did, and the receiver decides. And that creates a constant psychological inversion. For decades, Mar-a-Lago functioned as a stage where Trump was the unquestioned center. Staff deferred, members followed, cameras came to him, decisions radiated outward. Now the flow reverses. Staff report to the receiver. Schedules are approved by the receiver. Policies are enforced by the receiver. Disputes are escalated to the court. If Trump gives instructions to employees, those instructions don't carry authority. They become incidents, documented, logged, potentially reported. This is why judges use receivership only when they believe nothing else works, because once imposed, it doesn't just limit misconduct, it neutralizes dominance, and the political consequences are immediate. Mar-a-Lago wasn't just a residence, it was a command center. Fundraisers, strategy sessions, loyalty rituals, donor access, informal negotiations, media choreography, all of that relied on spontaneity and control. Receivership kills spontaneity. Political operations cannot function when every gathering requires prior approval, legal review, security assessment, and operational justification. A campaign can't build momentum if its home base is conditional. Every event becomes uncertain, every plan becomes tentative, every gathering risks denial or restriction. That uncertainty alone is enough to force operations elsewhere. And moving an operation mid-cycle is chaotic, expensive, and disruptive. Then comes the money. The cash flow that once fed Trump's broader ecosystem no longer reaches him directly. Revenue still exists, but it's routed through the receiver, prioritized for repairs, compliance, insurance, staffing, and court-approved expenses. From a business perspective, this is devastating. An asset that produces revenue you cannot access behaves like a frozen asset, except you still carry reputational risk, legal exposure, and emotional attachment. Meanwhile, legal fees continue. Political expenses continue. Other properties still require capital. The flagship is no longer a source of strength. It becomes a drain you cannot touch. And there's no quiet way to absorb this. Every interaction reinforces the loss. Members notice new rules. Staff notice new management. Vendors notice new signatories. Media notice the shift in tone. Even silence becomes loud. And then there's the humiliation factor, the one that doesn't show up in balance sheets. Powerful figures survive scandals when they can still project control, when they can still command rooms, when they can still act. Receivership removes that theater. It turns a dominant figure into a regulated participant. That's why this hits differently than indictments, fines, or investigations. Those are external threats. This is internal displacement. Trump isn't being chased from the outside. He's being replaced from the inside. And every day it continues, normalization sets in, staff adapt, members adjust, operations stabilize without him. That's the quiet danger. Once the property runs smoothly under someone else, the argument for returning control weakens. Judges don't rush to restore authority to someone who's proven disruptive, especially when stability has returned without them. Which leads to the final question, the one everything hinges on. Is this temporary, or is this the moment where control is never fully recovered? This is the part most people misunderstand. Receivership is technically temporary. In reality, it often becomes permanent. Courts do not appoint receivers as a pause button. They do it as a last resort, after concluding that the owner cannot be trusted with control. Once that conclusion is reached, the burden shifts completely. From that moment on, the owner doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. They must prove transformation, not promise it. And proving transformation under receivership is brutally difficult. To regain control, Trump would need to satisfy every condition set by the court, not partially, not symbolically, but completely and convincingly. All safety violations must be fixed and independently verified. All financial misrepresentations must be addressed. All contempt findings must be purged through full compliance. All interference must stop permanently. And most importantly, behavior must change in a way the court finds credible. That last requirement is the hardest. Judges don't evaluate apologies. They evaluate patterns, and patterns matter more than intent. Public attacks on the court, refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing, attempts to bypass the receiver, or indirect pressure on staff don't help an appeal. They validate the original decision. Each act of defiance becomes evidence that control should not be returned. This is why many receiverships quietly evolve into long-term arrangements. The property stabilizes, operations normalize, compliance improves, risk decreases. From the court's perspective, the question becomes simple. Why reintroduce instability? If the receiver is managing effectively, protecting safety, following the law, and maintaining financial order, the incentive to restore control disappears. In many historical cases, one of three outcomes follows. 1. The owner sells the property to escape the receivership. 2. The receiver remains indefinitely until litigation ends years later. 3. The court orders a sale if compliance cannot be achieved. The rarest outcome is full restoration of control to the original owner. That requires humility, compliance, silence, and patience, traits courts must observe, not be told about. And here's the deeper consequence that extends beyond one property. Receivership sends a signal, not just to courts, but to banks, partners, insurers, and regulators. If a judge determined that an owner cannot manage their flagship asset, everyone else recalibrates risk. Lenders reassess exposure, insurers reconsider coverage, partners review termination clauses, regulators increase scrutiny, the effect cascades. Even assets untouched by the court feel the gravity, and that's where Warren Buffett's framework becomes critical. A flagship asset isn't just valuable, it's foundational. It anchors credibility, it defines identity, it projects competence. Lose operational control of that asset, and the narrative flips. Success becomes suspicion, dominance becomes doubt, control becomes conditional. You can own the deed and still lose the story. That's the final damage receivership inflicts. Narrative collapse, and narratives matter. They shape how people invest, how supporters believe, how employees commit, how institutions engage. Once the flagship no longer answers to you, the empire stops revolving around you. And empires don't survive that shift. So now everything hinges on one variable. Can Trump demonstrate sustained compliance and restraint long enough to convince a court that control won't be abused again? History suggests that once receivership is imposed at this level, especially on a defining asset, control rarely returns, not because courts want punishment, but because stability becomes more valuable than restoration. And once a system functions without you, the case for bringing you back becomes weaker every day.